Partisan redistricting, or gerrymandering, is about fractions, percentages. These coins represent voters in an evenly divided state, 50 dimes, 50 pennies. These 100 coins elect 10 representatives. That means each voting district must contain 10 coins. Now, real people don't live in neat rows, so let's mix them up. Okay, this is our hypothetical evenly divided state. Let's see what happens if the dimes draw the maps. 10 coins in each district. For the dimes, first thing we do is pack the pennies. Give them 2 safe districts, but pack them solid. The remaining 8 districts are won by the dimes, by smaller but still comfortable margins. The dimes win 8 districts, and the pennies win 2. The dimes overwhelmingly control the legislature. Of course, if the pennies drew the district lines, the opposite would be true. Let's rig it for the pennies. For the pennies, we follow the same pack and crack strategy. Pack the dimes into 2 safe districts and crack the remaining 8 districts to win by the same margin, 8-2. Well, now that we've destroyed democracy, let's consider what this map would look like if the districts were drawn for compactness and keeping communities of interest together. You get evenly divided districts in an evenly divided state. Some go heavily dime, some go penny, but that's to be expected. People live where they live, and that is what democracy is about. It's not about party bosses rigging election districts so they can fix the election results.
Okay, we're recording.
Okay, again, excellent film, Bob. So thank you so much for pulling it together and explaining the whole issue very, very succinctly for, people that understand politics and people who don't. Because gerrymandering and the way these districts come about, if gerrymandering continues, legislative issues just will not be resolved because they're so packed and cracked to keep the legislative agenda under control. And it doesn't matter what party you're with, it has to be fair. So I'd like to ask again, especially with the recording, is the Voting Rights Act that's at the federal level now, what impact will that have on the states, if any?
Well, my understanding is that the Voting Rights Act and H.R. 1, and for that matter, any law passed by the United States Congress, by both houses of the United States Congress, is limited to federal elections. That can have a huge knock-on effect, but that does not solve everything, and quite particularly, it will not solve state-level, legislative gerrymandering. That's going to take a more and a different fight. I hope HR 1 passes, but I'm gonna bring in Ruth Bader Ginsburg for just a second here, because Ruth Bader Ginsburg kind of famously thought that not famously, but she thought that the Roe v. Wade was bad tactics. It's not that she disagreed with the right to vote. I mean, with a woman's right to choose. It's that she said, this is bad tactics because it's going to make blowback. So, I mean, to some degree, I think the same thing exists. We really have to bring the pressure at the state level. If it just comes from Washington, there's going to be a built-in resistance. So I want HR 1 to pass and the Voting Rights Act to pass, but it can't just be left alone at that point.
Right.
Before we get too far with anything else, if we could just briefly introduce yourselves. Yep. Amy, why don't we start with you?
Okay, my name is Amy Black. I'm with the League of Women Voters in LaPorte County.
Okay. Lee?
Well, I'm Leigh Morris. I am a member of the League of Women Voters of LaPorte County. I'm a co-coordinator of the Better Government Study Group in LaPorte County, and I'm very privileged to be one of 9 members of the Indiana Citizens Redistricting Commission, which is the shadow group that is to demonstrate, I think, to the people of Indiana how redistricting could be done by a Citizens Redistricting Commission. This is a topic that I've long been interested in, involved with, and I've come convinced that in Indiana, the one missing ingredient we've had is public understanding of what gerrymandering is, what its impact is, and the willingness to be involved in making the voice of the general public heard. We've got legislators who are actually in favor of fair and equitable redistricting, but they will not have the courage to act because party leadership pushes them in a different direction and they don't feel supported by general voters. So I'm hoping that we're able to really generate that public interest and public support for fair and equitable redistricting.
And then Bob, did you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Robert Millman, Bob Millman. I'm the filmmaker of Line in the Street. If anybody would like to see it, you really have to just look up lineinthestreet.com and that'll take you there. It's at this point, it's a 30-minute film. And I'm going to be making that 2-minute pennies and dimes piece available. I'm not sure whether you're going to set it up before this or after this or insert it, but it will be in there. And, basically, I want people to understand that this is foundational to the way our states run. And it is a sleazy math trick. I don't have anything kinder to say about it than that. It's just a sleazy math trick.
So, Lee or Amy, would you like to explain how redistricting currently works in Indiana, since the film was focused on Pennsylvania?
I think that's best answered by Lee, who's...
Well, the General Assembly is responsible for redistricting. And as things are generated now, if they're unable, the General Assembly is unable to produce a redistricting plan in a timely manner, then a very small select group, all political appointees, all elected officials, are engaged to draw the maps and then submit them to the General Assembly for approval, and then for approval by the governor. In the past, at least, when the General Assembly has been doing the redistricting, there's been a modicum of opportunities for public input, but very limited. And really, it's a very private process that's done by the General Assembly within their own chambers. Thank you very much.
So, Lee, there are no public hearings on this held by the legislature at all?
They may if they desire, and they've done a few. But in contrast to our independent Citizens Redistricting Commission, where we've already established a plan to hold public hearings, we've had 8 of 9 already in each of the congressional districts. And then once maps are drawn and become public, then we will hold additional public hearings, because we think it's really important for the people to know and understand, just like this film demonstrated.
Are you seeing any movement in Indiana where this is getting more steam behind it, more interest?
It's a little hard to tell. The General Assembly is very protective of its prerogative in this regard, justifiably so, because with the redistricting, one party has been able to gather a supermajority in both the House and the Senate, and they control the governor's office. So it's a closed process right now, really. And if you look at the number of uncontested races for both the Indiana House and the Senate, the people who are in office have a vested interest in trying to stay in office. And therefore, being able to control the redistricting maps is one of the ingredients in keeping them there. So they've had the right to choose their voters rather than the voters choosing them.
Now, who's actually in there drawing these maps? It's not the whole House. Is it the Elections Committee?
It'll be through the Elections and Apportionment Committee of the House that's primarily involved with that. House and Senate are both involved with it, but the Elections and Apportionment Committee of the House is primary.
And a question for all of you guys. What are some of the consequences of gerrymandering nationwide or even statewide?
Well, if you look at Indiana's situation, where we have so many races for House and Senate that are uncontested, if you look at the fact that the domination of one party at supermajority in both houses does not represent the distribution of voters. I think we're something like 80-20% Republican versus Democrat in the General Assembly versus a population that's arguably somewhere close to maybe 55-45% in each party. That's not representative of the people.
So that really determines too what legislative issues they determine to
Exactly.
tackle, like the lead in the water in
Exactly.
Pennsylvania. If they, one party's ruling it and they're just not that interested in, spending the money for the infrastructure to clean up the pipes so there's no lead in the water, it's not affecting their districts or their communities of interest, so be it. We're not going to take it up. So legislative issues that are really important to all of us are depending upon the state legislators to take those issues up and to resolve the issues. But if they have no interest, they're not going to do it.
Well, structurally, what gerrymandering does is it really shifts the legislator's duties from the voter to the party.
Exactly.
And, that's not in anybody's constitution.
Exactly. Exactly.
And as far as solutions are concerned, in a way, one of the simplest solutions that could be done, I'm not saying this is easy, would be to force the committee drawing the maps to hold their meetings open. That's different than having a public meeting where people can talk.
Absolutely.
In a longer version of my film, I use an interview with somebody who got the legislative district map information through a court order from in Pennsylvania. That's the only time that has happened ever in this country. It hides behind this manufactured, we have to negotiate in secret argument, but it really is a false argument. And I think that would be a really, how do you deny, no, you can't negotiate in secret. To me, that seems like that's a reasonable ask.
It is. Lee, is the ICRC asking for that?
The ICRC is asking for an open process with public input, public involvement. I don't know that they've been specific about the request for the General Assembly Committee functioning as in a public open meeting as they are drawing the maps. That may be something for them to consider further. I haven't seen that language. If I could circle back to HR 1 for just a second. There is something in HR 1 that a lot of people aren't aware of, and that is the right to vote in federal law. Because currently, the right to vote is only, the individual right to vote is only in state law. So that ends up hamstringing anything that a Supreme Court could do. How can a Supreme Court rule on a law if federal law does not have the individual right to vote? It gives them a way out. Interesting. I hadn't noticed that.
I didn't either, because the Supreme Court did rule with, did they not rule the U.S. Supreme Court, or that was the state Supreme Court with Pennsylvania, but in Arizona?
And North Carolina?
Well, I'm not aware of the Supreme Court doing anything with voting rights other than age, race, religion, sex. They've carved those out, but the individual right to vote, you just won't find it in the United States Constitution.
That's very interesting.
So that's why I keep harping on states, and why I made the film.
It's a really an important point, Bob. And
Very. And our schedule used to be, Lee, in Indiana, that the state legislature, after the census came out, by April, they would have the new maps drawn. But since the census was delayed this year, that's not going to take place until September. Do you know when in September?
September 30 is the current target date for the census data to be available to the General Assembly. And then they will come back because they've already gone into, the session's already closed. So they will be scheduling a special session of the General Assembly in October. And one of our concerns is it will be so compact and so abbreviated because they want to get in and get out.
Mm-hmm.
And they won't provide the opportunity for public involvement and public input.
I'm sure by then it'll be a foregone conclusion.
Well, they really can't do much until they have census data.
Oh, they still don't have the data.
No, they don't. They won't have the data until September 30th. So there's not much they can do ahead of the General Assembly, because I think there are going to be some fairly significant shifts in population within Indiana that will result in changes that will have to be made in the maps.
Okay. Bob, do you know where Rep. Tarzai is now in Pennsylvania?
He managed to retire quietly.
I wondered.
I have no idea if I had anything to do with it. I think he probably, figured my work's done here. But, he also famously there was some quote, video of him saying that bragging about suppressing the vote. Which, there he was, it was on, what's that, Hardball with MSNBC 10 years ago or so. Mm-hmm. But I mean, the damage it does is just so pervasive, and the people who are doing it don't want you to think about what it is. Mm-hmm. They want you to think about us versus them, and actually, it isn't us versus them. It's damaging members of the majority party as well. They're not getting good. They're not getting free flow of representation. I mean, to my mind, in one sense, a democracy is about a free market of ideas, and the best ideas win. And the best ideas are not winning if the game is rigged.
Well, and there's a real lack of diversity. I mean, I saw that in the clip with the Pennsylvania State House. I mean, you lose all the diversity, which is therefore you lose, important issues.
Yeah, it's just everybody's playing for, and it damages the minority party as well. I mean, it forces, especially when you get more and more packed districts, the people that are deciding the elections are the most ardent people at the farthest end of the spectrum. So yes. It just leads to more gridlock.
Mm.
So I had a question about, this came up in the movie, or the film. There were arguments against an independent citizens redistricting commission. Are we seeing that in Indiana? What are some of the arguments against something like that?
Yes. The folks who are opposed to that are very strong in their feeling that you couldn't possibly get an impartial, independent citizens commission, that there will always be political influence that's involved there, so it's impossible to do that. Number two, that you shouldn't be delegating something as important as that to a group of non-elected people, that they are not accountable to the voters, therefore it should be done only by people who've been elected by the people to do that job. That there's not enough knowledge about the redistricting process among people who are not engaged in that area. Now, the list goes on. Most of them are specious arguments, but they're there. But they all kind of come back to the fact that the General Assembly wants to control it themselves, internally. Thank you very much.
One of the arguments that is made everywhere is that gerrymandering can't be fixed because there's no perfect solution. And that's really a nonsense argument. It's part of the what I call the perfect is the enemy of the good. In Pennsylvania, I'm not saying that's the best answer, but they had a surprisingly simple one. Just divide the fewest number of political subdivisions possible.
Excellent.
I don't think anybody wants perfectly fair. They don't want a perfect system. They want a system where they have a voice. And right now, I don't know. I mean, I don't know, but I think people want a system, a kind of rough justice. I don't think they want perfection.
I think you're
Yeah,
right.
but they certainly don't want their city, like, let's take Michigan City and the city of LaPorte. Can you imagine if we had 5 congressional leaders representing Michigan City and then say 6 congressional leaders representing LaPorte?
Yeah. Ridiculous. Yes.
Yeah, that's not representation. That's, hey, we need 200 more Republicans and 200 more Democrats over here so we can make this district up. They're just borrowing from cities to make up their districts.
And make them up in the way they want them to be. Thank you very much. Yes.
So they can get reelected and be in there for life.
Yeah.
Would term limits have an effect on this, do you think, or would it be the same?
From a party leadership standpoint, it would be the same, because the party leaders want to keep that party in power. They want to keep the super majorities, for example, that they have. And even if the individual members of the General Assembly are term limited, they would want to be able to perpetuate that by the fact that they've secured a district for that particular party.
Now, could we go to the state legislature, and this is brought up in the film, if the ICRC, if those members were appointed, is that such a big deal as opposed to, volunteer, like, Lee, we got you on the ICRC, fortunate for us, to represent Northwest Indiana. But it is having these people appointed by the state lawmakers might make it an easier pill for them to swallow. But is that such a bad idea?
Not really, but in Indiana, we had the General Assembly, in their wisdom, in 2016. I'm showing my age there. In 2016, the General Assembly established a summer study group to review this whole area of redistricting and the gerrymandering problem. And they really did a wonderful job of making a strong recommendation for a nonpartisan redistricting commission for Indiana that would be approved by the General Assembly in advance, and then would be accountable to the General Assembly for the results. And it established a procedure if the General Assembly didn't agree with the redistricting done by the commission, how it would be considered beyond that. Well, extremely well done. Came back to the General Assembly, and the chairman of the Elections and Apportionment Committee would not allow a hearing. And that's been the case in 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020. We've had legislative proposals in this regard that the chairman of that committee, one person, has been able to stop it and prevent it from being considered.
And that just happened recently, too, with the Elections Committee in Indiana, I believe.
Exactly. So I think as long as you have an independent redistricting committee with a thoughtful way that the members are selected, and it's approved by the General Assembly, you have the authority of elected officials to act.
Okay, so we're just about out of time here. I'm going to ask, does anybody have anything else that they want to say to wrap up? Any comments they want to make at all?
Well, I'll mention an idea. Of course, the tough thing about all of this is trying to get through to the people who make the decision, because they're hiding. So I came up with this idea for a really simple single piece of paper. So the top is addressed to whomever it should be addressed to. The middle part mentions your rights under the Indiana State Constitution. And the third part is something you can sign. And the idea of this is that anybody could post it, anybody could print it, you fold it, you put a stamp on it, and you send it.
Sounds like a good idea to me, Bob.
Lee, can I ask you real quick, in Indiana, is there any hope?
Yes, I really think the hope is generating public awareness and public support. Politicians really do listen when there is significant public opinion being expressed. My friends in the General Assembly have told me, Lee, you come down here, and 2 or 3 other people come down, and I get a half a dozen letters, but there's not a groundswell of support for fair and equitable redistricting in Indiana. And until there is, we're not going to do anything. Well, I think we can generate that groundswell of support for fair and equitable redistricting in Indiana. And I think showing this wonderful film as many times as we have the opportunity to do it would be an important step in that process.
Again?
Well, I'm in. It's easy to get in touch with me. lineinthestreet.com is the website. lineinthestreet@gmail.com is my email address.
And people can watch your film Line in the Street on Vimeo, I believe, vimeo.com,
Yes.
for a small fee. If they want to watch at home, they can bring their friends, they can bring their family.
Yes, and I'm working on a longer version, although there's a value to short, but I'm working on a longer version because there's a lot of important details I had to just run by because I'm trying to tell a relatively complex story in a short amount of time.
Well, you've done it very well.
Thank you.
The pennies and dimes were very helpful.
Well, I'm going to make that available, and that is available for anyone to post.